Thank you for joining Black and Blue with AK and Officer Jai. I am AK Kamara.
And I'm Jai Hansen.
What's going on, man?
How are you?
Been all right. It's been kind of a weird week here in Minnesota because it got super cold, super early. And I know that one of the most cliche things to do in Minnesota is talk about the weather. But it was super cold, man. And the Forest Lake actually had like a sheet of ice.
I was fine.
Well, that's because you were where? Where were you?
I was in Arizona.
In the desert heat. So, yeah, it's kind of an interesting week. Thank you, everyone, for joining the podcast. Make sure that you guys hit the like button, hit that share button, join in on the conversation. We will put your comments, the ones that we find are applicable to our conversation. We'll read it on air. So make sure to, again, put your comments of what you want to talk about. This podcast is about showcasing people, organization groups that get beat up in the media, also having a strong emphasis on law enforcement because we believe these are things that are important to society. Far too often, law enforcement's been demonized, especially in the last couple of years, and a lot of people that get out and speak their voice, if it's against what the conventional wisdom is, they get beat up in the media. And so that's what this show truly is about. And I know, Jai, everybody at this point knows about the tragic shooting that took place at the nightclub in Colorado Springs, in which 5 people died, and I believe there's a total of 25 that were wounded. I believe I read that 19 people were shot, and then some of the other folks, when people run and things like that. And I know for you being in law enforcement, when there's a tragedy that occurs in a community, it's important for you that law enforcement is able to provide a common place for people to join together, feel like someone's handling things. And, you kind of want to talk a little bit about what you saw happen yesterday.
Yeah, I think we have the clip. I want to give credit to the chief out there, Chief Vasquez, I think, with Colorado Springs and his press conference. If we can go to that.
Whenever you're ready. Okay.
Yeah, go to that, and then I'll talk about it afterwards.
Are she, her. We respect all of our community members, including our LGBTQ community. Therefore, we will be identifying the victims by how they identify themselves and how their families have loved and identified them. The first person I'll identify is Kelly Loving. Kelly's pronouns are she, her. Daniel Aston. Daniel's pronouns are he, him. Derek Rump. Derek's pronouns are he, him. Ashley Paugh, that's P-A-U-G-H. Ashley's pronouns are she, her. Raymond Green Vance. Raymond's pronouns are he, him.
AK, this is why I want to talk about this, and this is why I wanted to show that clip, is because, number one, I have never seen that in a press conference from public safety and our law enforcement officials. We have the honor as law enforcement officers to serve communities. We don't get the choice who we protect, right? We protect the victims, we protect innocent people, we protect the accused. And we take an oath to do that. And I think this is a huge step to show support for a grieving community in Colorado Springs, that we stand alongside of them and we support them. So I give credit to that chief out there for acknowledging that and showing support for our LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah, so, for me, I think that when tragic events happen, what matters most are the community that's hurting. And the last thing that I think anyone should do is want to politicize, regardless of your feelings. Myself personally, I think that it's wrong to try and force people to have to use someone's pronouns. But this is different, right? This is, paying specifically respect to those that died. And I think that taking that step forward and having that acknowledgement, I think people can say, you know what, like in this specific case, in this specific instance, let's give dignity to the people that lost their lives 100%. And I think that in general, I've had these conversations. I mean, you kind of talked about this before. I think that you should always treat people with respect. When it comes to the issue of pronouns, the issue that, again, I've always had is that when you try and force me to have to conform to your perspective, I'm going to push back, because you don't get to tell me what to do and then hide behind like, oh, like it makes me feel this way because I don't think that that's proper. But I'm always going to try and treat people with respect.
Right, and this is not the political
about.
arena.
Right.
This is not the political.
This is human life being lost, man.
Human life, and this is also public safety. And when it comes to public safety, we protect all regardless of their viewpoints.
And I think that's important also to kind of keep in mind too, is that, you know, there is a role for law enforcement in our society that reaches far greater and beyond what I think people think law enforcement is these days. You know, there's so much back and forth about, do we need cops? And I mean, it's crazy that this conversation is even coming back up, but I'm starting to see it percolate again of like, oh, like what's the point of having cops? Like they don't stop anything. And I think it's a ridiculous perspective to have. So this is just another piece to just show like it's deeper than just this one aspect. You know, yes, cops catch bad guys, but cops can't be everywhere all the time. And so this is also an important part as they go through this investigation, because let's be very candid. There's a lot of things that we don't know, right? You know, of course, on both sides, people are going to run out there and be the first ones to be like, this is all your fault, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I think that is dangerous. There's a bunch of people out there like Bernie Sanders that are blaming specific people, not even knowing what the evidence is of what the motivation. This man clearly had evil intent in his heart in regards to what that evil intent came from. Was he radicalized by the right? There's no evidence to prove that he was. And I just think that what people need to do is take a step back, chill out, and you know, see what the investigation. Because the most important thing is that people lost their lives. Like that's just what it is, and we can get to the rest of it when information comes out. But it's crazy how people want to jump into it. And you know, again, just my heart and my thoughts go out to anyone that lost a loved one. It's a hard thing to have to deal with. Obviously, loss and tragedy. And trying to find answers is important. So, you know, when human life is lost, I'm a guy that's pro-life, and I believe that all life is precious. So we have to be able to honor those that lost their lives and come together.
Well, there's going to be plenty of time to go into all of that and dive into what the reasons were. But right now, let's support that community and support the people that are hurting right now. And I applaud that chief for taking that stance, because that is very historical. In a press conference to take that on. So I applaud that.
And, you know, that's really, again, what the show is about, is that we want to be able to highlight and showcase efforts by law enforcement, whether good or bad, and also be able to have meaningful conversations with people that, again, against the conventional wisdom, are getting beat up. And today's guest kind of perfectly encapsulates that second part about people that are outliving their life, doing the things that they do to honor the values that are important to them. And by getting together with a bunch of other people that have similar values, they become demonized. And so today's guest is Melissa Schultz. She is, I believe, a co-founder or a founding member and currently a board member for the organization Minnesotans for Health and Parental Rights. Thank you and welcome to the show.
Yeah, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, you know, kind of get things started. The organization that I mentioned, can you kind of tell us, you know, this might be a long story and that's fine. You can take some time. How did this organization come to be?
Yeah, it is quite a long story. It came out of necessity, not out of want. You know, like even sitting here for me, you know, I'm shaking and I'm nervous because this wasn't a goal. I don't want to be a health freedom celebrity or a health freedom savior. I'm just trying to protect my kids. And so some of the original board members, so I'm kind of the rookie board member at 6 years of kind of involvement in the health freedom movement. The original board members started about a decade ago. And it really was just parents, most of them in the disabilities community, really getting together in a Facebook group and kind of talking through things that they were seeing and being like, you know, this doesn't add up, or how can I advocate for my child, or this just, you know, my gut is telling me something's wrong here. And it was really born from that, and it grew from there into, they're going to take vaccine exemptions away. And a lot of our families feel that they were injured by vaccines, or, they had questions. And obviously that's a really controversial topic. But it shouldn't be. And that's kind of the stigma we're trying to break, because, I take a thyroid medication. Thyroid medications have side effects. Does that mean that people shouldn't take thyroid medications? No. And vaccines should be approached in that exact same fashion. Or even if you look at the opioid epidemic, right? Should some people get opioids? Yeah, probably. There's a time and a place for all of it. But we really grew over all of these years. And then right in 2020, we formed a formal organization. But it just kind of was like, okay, what do we need to do next? And then we would learn something and we would grow. And we learned very quickly politics was where we needed to be. 6 years ago, I didn't know the difference between the House and the Senate.
Sure. Yeah. Because you were just a parent that cared about your kid, connecting with other parents that also care about their kids. And you were finding that
Correct.
There was common things that all of you were having issues. So, kind of fast forward to now where you're at, you have a Facebook page, and producer Gabe, I believe it's picture number 1. You have this Facebook page. You got like 19,000 followers on it. And, that's kind of a good place for people to be able to probably start that are connected on Facebook. And it's just a place for people to go. Can you kind of tell me what that community is like? I imagine people are from like all different walks of life, even political persuasions, right?
Well, and also I think it's important too that, this didn't just start in 2020, right? You're talking about this started a decade ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and you've been on for 6 years.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And so how I got involved was, I thought anti-vaxxers were crazy. I was like, these people are nuts. They don't know what they're talking about. And then someone in my family experienced injury. So her daughter at her 2-month appointment had brain swelling. And, that's documented. It's written as a side effect, and it happened. And at the same time that was going on, I was pregnant, and I got the Tdap. So when you're pregnant, at roughly 36 weeks or so, women get the tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis vaccine. And immediately, something wasn't right. I could kind of feel like everything was off, but you're chalking it up. First pregnancy, you start losing your hair and you're gaining excess weight, and everything just didn't quite feel right. And going forward, I just started researching, and I was like, what am I going to do? Is there a genetic component to this? Because we had another family member step out and say, hey, I think something happened to my son as well. And then through more conversations, another family member said, are you guys talking about vaccines? We had an injury too, and we never told anybody because we were worried you weren't going to accept us in the family anymore. And so we're sitting at the table going, none of us, we're all kind of going through this. And everybody was too scared to talk to everybody else. And so, we don't know if there's a genetic component here. But at that same time, so I kind of made a stance of I was going to learn. I was going to be fully informed. And so I started by fact-checking people's Facebook posts.
Sure.
And that led to another thread, which led to another thread, which led to another thread. And I made a kind of a thing with myself that I was going to read about vaccines every day for an hour until I felt like I made a fully informed choice. And 6 years later, here I am. So I did not expect this to be my life. I did not expect where this would turn out. But what ended up happening is right after my son was born, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder. And in my research, I found a lot of stuff that correlates that vaccine specifically with my autoimmune disorder in that exact time frame. And there's really not a lot of published science about it, so they don't know. And then going through my son that I was pregnant with, he has a pediatric fever syndrome. He is undiagnosed. They have no idea what it is. It doesn't have a name. But we don't know what certain vaccines will do to him. And so a lot of it is the unknown. And that is really where a lot of us families are, because in order to get a medical exemption, you have to already be injured by one. and it's 1. So if you are injured by the TDAP, that does not mean that they will exempt you from the MMR or any of that. So we're kind of exploring that and trying to figure out where we sit. And then that's kind of how we got into activism, was we were seeing California happen where they took exemptions away. And we were like, they're going to do that here. And sure enough, a bill dropped to remove our exemptions. And that is where we figured out we really need to get involved in politics. And so
when did that bill drop?
In Minnesota?
Yeah.
I'm not totally sure. I know he dropped one in 2020, I believe. They have a few different ones. Mm-hmm. So they have lowering the age of consent to 12 so that your children at age 12 could consent to any of these medical procedures. And then I believe they had some language change ones before I got involved.
So that's what kind of motivated you to, all right, we got to get in politics now.
Yep. And that was a total accident. Like I said, I didn't know the difference between the House and the Senate.
Yeah.
So it was a crash course for all of us. And then our other board member, Alicia, she's like, hey, I found out there's these things called BPOUs, and I think we should go there. And and we're
AK, you know anything about those?
Yeah, I know all about those. I used to actually be the chair of one.
Yep, exactly. So, and yeah, we're kind of a ragtag crew of, every background. A lot of people feel that we're a Republican organization, but we're completely bipartisan because we feel that this shouldn't be a partisan topic. I mean, everybody should agree with bodily autonomy. And really what we have figured out over the years is the people that get hurt are the kids like my son. Because he can't get a medical exemption. No doctor will give him one, especially now that they've really politicized the medical board. So if they pass this law, my family will become medical refugees of the state of Minnesota.
Yeah. So I think this is an important kind of aspect because, like you said, a lot of people say, oh, you're just like some secret Republican organization and you just want to secretly get Republicans elected because they're paying you or something crazy. So I know that you did not come from the right. You came from the left. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about what that was like? So, how many times did you vote for a Democrat if you don't have a hard number? But tell us about your kind of move and how long you, or if ever, you've ever voted for a Republican.
Yeah, so pretty much my entire voting life, from 18 until 38, I voted for Democrats all across the board because I felt they really had my values, and one of them being bodily autonomy because I was very pro-choice and, had LGBT, there wasn't a TQ then, but LGBT friends. And so all that stuff was really important to me. And I minored in sustainability and Republican safety environment and all of these things that I thought I knew.
Yeah.
And so we got involved. And one of our missions was to form relationships, positive relationships, and that we will make our change through positive relationships. Because it's just not in us. I'm pretty sure Angie, our other board member, has never raised her voice in her life.
Sure.
So really this idea of protest and angry and fight the government was never our mission. It was become friends. And we learned, your politician, like Mark Grant said on your one of your last shows was...
Shout out to a callback because you watched the last episode.
I did. And I've met, and talked to Mark Grant. He actually authored a bill that we wrote. So we wrote the No Patient Left Alone Act in Minnesota. And he was one of those authors. But yeah, we learned that they're your neighbor. And you really want to get to know them. And so that's really what we've tried to do is get to know these politicians and form relationships with them and have them know who we are, because so much of this has been, just social media and, just people that don't understand it. So we're here to kind of break the myths and really keep it rational and keep it real.
Yeah, I kind of chuckle when you talk about that because I grew up Democrat and voted Democrat, and for me, the pivotal change for me was public safety and what happened after George Floyd and the civil unrest, where it's like, no, we can not tolerate this any longer. And for you, it's your kids. You have 2 kids, right? You have a son that you're talking about and a daughter.
Yep.
And now you have this movement that has started, but you are considered to be aligned with the Republican Party.
Right.
And for you, how does that make you feel when people want to just put you in a box? And you talk about your support for the LGBTQ plus and being pro-choice, and now you're a conservative Republican activist,
Right.
like AK.
Right.
Except I was never those things. I was like ambivalent at most before I came to the right. So like for you, was there an aha moment, or was it like, did you find like issue by issue, and then what was that like? Like which issue fell first for you?
I don't know. It was a transition over 6 years,
Yeah.
and it was really going to the Capitol and getting to meet them. Seeing who would talk to you and who wouldn't was really interesting to me. And then having things reframed in a lot of ways, like bodily autonomy, right? Yeah, obviously, abortion is a huge debate that always comes to mind. And then it was framed to me, well, Republicans aren't against bodily autonomy. They believe in bodily autonomy of the woman, but also the child.
Sure.
Nobody had ever explained that to me before. It was
Really?
like, no. And so that was kind of like, whoa, what? Like, I guess you're right. You do still care about the woman. And then, we have the log cabin Republicans. And one of the first LAs that I met when I went to the Capitol is a gay Republican. And I was just kind of like, how do you exist in the Republican world? And so...
That's cool. And real quick, LA is a legislative assistant. This is the person that is assigned to a state house member that runs basically their scheduling and sits in on conference meetings. And so shout out to the LAs. What up, Allie? I know a couple of LAs. What up, Andy? What up, man?
Yeah, they're wonderful. I always befriend the LA because they do so much of the hard work.
They do a lot of the hard work.
They do a lot of the hard work. Yeah, so that it really grew. And then, sitting around and you always hear like, oh, Republicans are all about, their rich business friends. And then I'm sitting in, meetings or just listening to people talking, and all I hear is small business, small business, small business. And I'm like, well, where are these rich business people?
Big
right?
Corporate fat cats.
Exactly. And they weren't there. And so it was like,
So is that what you're talking about when you're saying it was interesting to you who would talk to you and who would not talk to you?
Yeah.
Dive into that a little bit more. I mean, I can kind of see a trend going. But.
Yeah. And, we're meant as a grassroots organization. We didn't want to be, I don't want to be the face of health freedom. And I always say, I'm never going to save health freedom. It comes from the people. Mm-hmm. And so we figured out very early on, like, we want to empower others to find their voice. And so they organized, this was before I was involved. This was how I got involved, actually, was they organized lobby days where they will pair you with your legislator. Our other board members, they'll pair you with their legislator, and you can go meet them, and somebody will go with you from our organization and kind of talk through it. And you'd get some that just won't, if you bring up health freedom, they will not talk to you. They won't listen at all.
At all?
No.
They just shut it down.
They shut it down.
Wow.
Yep. They won't meet with their constituents. So it's not even like me from an organization, which I guess you would, we're not paid, but you would consider us a lobbyist.
Sure.
We're talking their constituents. So we organized people across the state into district groups to really get to know their own legislators.
So that's the thing that's so fascinating to me. And hopefully someone that's listening,
frustrating, right?
And frustrating and fascinating. So hopefully someone that's listening that maybe has had like a negative opinion of what Republicans are, like this is the thing that I tell people a lot. I personally, I'm very partisan. I'm like a hardcore right-wing Republican. However, I do think that it's important that people have a relationship with their elected representatives, regardless of what side they are. And I think the most frustrating part is that if you're a representative of the people and you are supposed to have constituents, you should never turn down speaking to someone, even if it ideologically is completely opposite to what your belief system is. And I've found that for whatever reason, and it shouldn't be the case, but it is, Republicans are more open to talking to people that have completely opposing views than the Democrats are. And I don't get why that is, but I want to encourage, like, if you're a Democrat and you're listening and you're an elected representative or you're in LA, you need to talk with the people around you and say, hey, this is the rap that we're getting. We definitely need to change this because it just makes you a bad political leader.
Well, I think it's the same reason right now Democrats aren't debating during election cycles, right? They just are going to their side of the room and not having that dialogue. I think Ashley said something, come to the table and have a conversation. It's the same reason why we can't get Democrat elected officials and politicians on this show. They just will not come on here, and I don't know why. We have reached out to them. One has said that they would come on, and we're still waiting to hear back, but we want to have that dialogue and have that conversation. And we are not getting it on our side, and it sounds like you weren't getting it on your side.
No, no, don't get me wrong. There are some wonderful ones. There are some absolutely wonderful people on both sides. And, not every Republican is rosy either.
Sure.
But yeah, that's really been our experience. And I think that was kind of the wake-up call for me. And really those positive relationships and who can you call. And we had a great example of what can happen. So last Friday, a bunch of us went out to just kind of decompress. We were all helping on the Jensen campaign because obviously he is kind of our health freedom.
The health freedom guy
He's
in the
health
race,
freedom
right?
god, right? Yeah. Like to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And he was actually the first senator I ever met on total accident, and he was very kind to me. So,
well, tell that story. How did you meet him?
It was that first lobby day, so I didn't know any of the board members. I kind of met him on Facebook, and I go to the Capitol, and they have a little room set up, and they're like, give you a packet of information that you can bring to your legislator and tell you how to talk to him. And the only person that I knew in the room was like, okay, I'm going to go over to the Senate. And I was like, can I follow you? And he was like, yeah, sure. And so I'm in heels, and I'm with these two doctors who are going to go talk to the Senate. And I'm just kind of like chasing them down the sidewalk and just being like, I'm with these doctors, and I'm going to talk to a senator, and oh my goodness. And we just walked in, and one of them knew Dr. Jensen. And so we went into his office, and I'm just plastered against the wall, like, don't say anything. Like, I can't believe this is happening. We're talking to a senator. And I just listened to their conversation as a fly on the wall. And then we went back down to that meeting room, and some other women walked in, and they were like, we want to meet our senator. And everybody was kind of busy. And I was like, well, I know where it is. Like, I'll walk you over there. And so we walked over to the Senate, and then we walked over to the House, and we actually got to meet Kurt Dowd as Speaker of the House at the time.
So you became a pro really fast at this.
In like a half hour.
Yeah. There you go.
Yep. And it was really, and I'm still friends with those two women. So yeah, it's all about relationships.
So I think this is so important, such a huge takeaway. And sometimes I try and talk about it, but it's easier coming from you. Wasn't it eye-opening how easy it was to actually talk to elected representatives, and then how fast they were receptive to you?
Yeah.
So this is the thing I tell people all the time. There's this idea that our elected representatives are so far away. Now, maybe when you talk about U.S. congressmen and women, it's a little bit different. But I would still even say to them, if you go to their legislative offices, you'll be able to get a conversation and talk to someone important. But going, especially when we're talking about our state house and our state senate, these people are easily accessible, and most of them are willing to listen. The ones that do listen, right? Some of them shut down, like you were saying. But for the vast majority, if you have something that's like a burning passion, go and talk to your elected representative. And is that you were kind of a little bit, it was a kind of a scary thing or whatever you want to describe it as. And then afterwards you're like, oh, this is not what I thought it would be. Was that your experience?
Yeah. I was actually really shocked. I remember the first time I called, it was Roger Chamberlain at the time, and I called his office and spoke to his LA, and I was like, I really want to meet with them. And he was like, okay, well, like, let's pick the Caribou by your house, and you guys can meet there. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like, this is scary. And and we sat down and we talked for an hour, and he agreed to author my bill, which at that time was actually related to autopsies. We tend to get involved in a lot of weird stuff that I never really would get into.
Yeah, so I want to kind of go down that route. There are so many issues that, it just depends on what the government's trying to do, right?
Right.
Every time there's a movement that is restrictive, or, a bunch of parents come out and they say, I'm having these issues. So kind of speak to that point of the fluidity. Like, what are some of the main tenets of your organization? Like, what are the things that you care the most about? I know you mentioned kind of this term that you've used a couple of times, but health freedom. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, so health freedom is really just making the decision for you and your family, making an informed decision. And are you getting that information to make it an informed choice? And in most cases, you are not. Medicine is highly political in this country, and obviously it's a profit machine.
Sure.
And, the opioid epidemic is a really great example. Like, we all know that. It's very tangible to a lot of us. Those same, like, predatory medicine practices are in everything. And, most of our board came about for vaccines, and that is kind of my passion. Actually, my handle on Telegram is actually Polio Princess, because I was so scared of it, right? Like, who is not terrified of polio?
Yeah.
So I read probably most books ever published on polio. So I'm kind of a dictionary on that subject, because it scared me so much that I was going to be informed. I don't know. It just... Yeah, it grows. It just grows.
So I think the important point that you made, and I think, again, I want to reiterate this, the misnomer gets put out that people are anti-vaxxer. Now, my experience has been, yes, there are some people that believe there is no such thing as a good vaccine. That is completely separate than people that say, I believe that I, along with my trusted medical provider, should be able to have all the information available to us to make the best medical decision for us. And anyone that anyone that balks at that and says, just trust the science, trust the doctor, that's a red flag for me. Mm-hmm. You said something earlier, there's a lot of money to be made in medicine. Let's not be naive. Like, this is the craziest thing. On the left, okay, back in the 90s, I remember, it was like, down with the corporations, right? Like, that was like a very, like, Democrat leftist thing, is that these greedy corporations are taking advantage of the little guy. Mm-hmm. And back then, the Republicans are like, what are you talking about? Like, right. Business, blah, blah, blah. But I think this weird shift has happened where now a lot of Republicans are at least now saying out loud, like, we should be careful of these corporations that are controlling so many things. And now it's been this weird shift where now it's like the left is protecting, especially the medical corporations, and like, other corporations, like the oil corporations, they're evil. But the medical corporations and the pharmaceuticals, like, they are benevolent. It's like, it's the same thing. I think we should be skeptical of all of them. And so I say all this to say that when it comes to vaccines, calling someone anti-vaxxer because they ask questions and they want data is a mischaracterization, in my opinion. Is that how you feel? And if not, like, we should talk about it.
Yeah, I would say, you do have what I will call vaccine abolitionists, right, who believe vaccines shouldn't exist at all. Yeah. I think where most of us fall is choice, right? I mean, if you're going to, if Ebola lands in Minnesota, I'm probably going to be thinking pretty hard about that.
Yeah.
Chicken pox?
Sure.
Probably not, right?
Sure.
So I think that's probably where most people lie. In the state of Minnesota, depending on the statistic, you're looking at about 2% of people don't have the full vaccination schedule.
Sure.
I think that's going to change. I think with COVID, they really messed up.
They screwed it up.
They really screwed it up. We have so many people. I have coworkers now that come to me and they're like, because of COVID, I'm reconsidering the entire childhood schedule.
So check this out. I pulled this data up. This is from Department of Health, Minnesota. And this is based off of people in the population that have vaccination. So if you look at the very top of that, from newborns to age 4, okay, only 14.3% have the full vaccination series. 4.9% got kind of a second or the booster, and then 4.9% are considered up to date. 5 to 11-year-olds, that number goes up a little bit higher, but still less than the majority have decided that they wanted to vaccinate their child. And you just said something that I think is important to understand, is that when you as an organization, as the government, when you allow skepticism to flourish because you won't address the issues that people are asking, you will actually create more skepticism because people are not stupid. In the age of information, I can go and I can find a message board, I can join a Discord, I can join a Telegram channel that will give me the information that I seek. And then let's be very candid. In those areas, sometimes there can come great skepticism, and it does sometimes become an echo chamber. And so it actually ends up doing more damage. Whereas if you have this conversation out front and people are open and candid, you actually can further along the conversation and get people where they're at. But I think the thing is for you and for your organization is you're about choice. You're not shaming people.
That's the number one thing, right?
You're like, if you want to go and do your thing, go and do your thing. Make an informed decision. If you want my opinion, I'm going to give you my opinion. But this is the thing. This is what I've noticed on organizations that are deemed right-wing anti-vaxxers. That's actually their position, the one that you just mentioned, that your organization has, the one that I talk about. But if you go out into the world and you say that, people are like, you're an anti-vaxxer, you don't trust science, and blah, blah, blah. So I just think that it's so wild, and you just said, it creates this hesitancy, and you think that vaccination rate is going to start to increase of people that don't just say, I'm an abolitionist.
Yeah. I think they dug themselves a public health hole. If you think about it, me, for example, if they weren't trying to take exemptions away, I wouldn't be sitting at this table. And somebody's going to watch this podcast and they're going to join our organization and they're going to be like, maybe I don't want this one or that one or something of that nature. And so I think they dug themselves a hole. And I experienced it, actually. So I can tell you the moment I lost faith in public health. Yeah. Now, I took this to the extreme, right? Sure. Nobody goes to the CDC, but I did. And
you went to the CDC?
I went to Georgia to the CDC. Yeah. Yep. I'm going to be informed. I'm going to be informed. And before my kids were born, I read 5 books a week. So now I don't read cheesy romance novels anymore. I read vaccine studies.
No Anne Rule anymore?
Yeah. So I went, and I will never forget it. So I went with a woman who lost her child, and she was like, I want to speak at an ACIP meeting. So an ACIP meeting is the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices, and they discuss the schedule. So they set that childhood schedule. Like, everybody freaked out recently because they put COVID on that schedule.
Yeah.
Which just means, you're going to give this dose at this age group, and it kind of outlines the parameters for doctors to follow. Mm-hmm. And so we were going to go to the CDC, and they have a public testimony period. And at that time, you had to go be present. And so she was like, will you go with me? Like, I'm nervous to go. And I was like, yeah, sure, let's go. And it was sad. There was a lot of parents there who testified about their child's injury or death. Some of them fully confirmed by medical doctors that it was the vaccination. Some of them not, unknowns. And when somebody anti-vax, if we want to call them that, would testify, they would put their heads down, they would look away, they would type on their computers. And then somebody from the industry would get up, and I will never forget it. This guy got up and he was like, oh, yeah, I got our stickers, like all these fancy new stickers about I got my flu shot and all this stuff. And they clap and they cheer.
Wow.
And I'm like, this is our government. Like, you can see this disconnect in this room, and you could cut the tension with a knife in that room. Yeah. And that's when I was like, none of this computes with me.
So when you think about future CDC guidelines and you look back at that last debate with Scott Jensen and Governor Walz, the NPR debate, where the governor refused to answer the question about what he will or will not be adding to the schedule, or if he's going to follow the CDC guidelines. What's your thought process on that?
Our question is kind of why. Why this sudden shift to mandate vaccinations across the board? Many people don't realize we've had exemptions in Minnesota since 1906. So all we're asking for is for the status quo. What they're asking for in mandates is actually unusual. Our 1906 law forbid them from mandating smallpox. So we have a long history of allowing exemptions. Typically, some states had like a $5 fine or something. There's a famous Supreme Court case, Jacobson versus Massachusetts. And that was about a small fine. I think, something like that here would, probably not be as awful, right? But we're talking force here. So our exemption law is currently tied to homeschool law. So if they pass it, your option is vaccinate or move. That is we would be the most extreme law in the country. There is no delayed schedule. There's no I want to skip one. There's no can I wait 6 months. It's you vaccinate on our schedule, on our timeline, or you move. So yeah, it's really scary for a lot of us. When we lost to the Senate, none of us that was not on our radar.
Yeah, I don't think it was on anyone's radar.
No.
Well,
and so
across the board, right? I mean, I can tell you with the debate, I mean, Dr. Jensen was very clear on his view on that, and the governor was not when it comes to his decisions. I don't know who's making them, but certainly when he can't even answer in a debate if he will follow those guidelines or not. That's pretty frustrating.
So here's the thing that is so crazy to me. So I followed what your organization's been doing. I've been able to meet a handful of the mama bears in your organization, and I truly, in my heart of hearts, have the greatest admiration for mothers that already have so much on their plate. And then they're like, we're going to be activists on top of raising our children, and most of you still having jobs, right? Like this is not just like, oh, you're just all these stay-at-home moms and your husbands are very, very wealthy, and this is like make believe, play pretend. This is like such and this is the experience that I've had meeting so many people in your organization. I know that there's fathers too that are involved in your organizations as well, but I've just had so much admiration. And so when I started to follow this, I made a TikTok video on it, and basically it breaks down this way, that because Minnesota has this exemption, that if it is added to the schedule, now it kind of is a two-step process. So if they add COVID-19 to Minnesota's schedule, the exemption still exists, but then there's a secondary movement that is going to get rid of this exemption. And that's kind of what you're talking about. And I think that the important thing for people to understand is that if they get rid of that exemption, I actually have a guy that I know really, really well, very smart man, and him and his wife have decided a long time ago that they were not going to vaccinate the children basically against anything, almost like vaccinating abolitionists. And when I told him about this, he was enraged. He was like, this is garbage, because him and his family, they've decided to have these exemptions because you can be non-medical exemptions in Minnesota. It could be a belief system, there's like something saying like you're basically not insane to request it, right? Like you just have to have someone say, hey, you're not a crazy person. It's like, oh, why don't you want to vaccinate kids? Because the aliens told me to. It's like, you don't get that, whatever. So I just think it's important for parents to understand that. What is your organization doing to try and sound the alarm and to let folks know that that this is a movement that is real in Minnesota, and there's already states that have done similar things, getting rid of non-medical exemptions, correct?
Yeah. So we know that they're probably going to follow California's playbook because they actually brought in Senator Pan, who was the representative who did it in California. He came to Minnesota, or I'm not sure if he actually came here, or if they just kind of had a Zoom meeting or something. But they openly talked about having him come here and teach the Democrat party how to remove our exemptions. So we know that's going to happen. Step one that we'll probably see, I mean, if they, now they have full control. So we don't know what they're going to do. And COVID changed this landscape, right? So 2 years ago, people were hesitant to talk to us, right? Like it was scary for them to talk to us. Now, 50% of the population, give or take, is going, yeah, I agree with you, freedom. So we really don't know what's going to happen. But as an organization, what we're doing is we're still just trying to empower people. So I give classes at the, if you follow us online, you'll see that I give classes on how a bill becomes a law so that you can pay attention like I didn't in high school. So how a bill becomes a law.
I think we can relate to that too.
Oh, yeah, I can definitely relate to that.
Exactly. So I walk people around the Capitol, like, here's the Senate and the House, and here's how this works. Really connecting people with our legislators. We do a lot of that. We try to build community. So like coming up in December, we have a holiday bazaar. So it's really just like-minded people, and we just kind of get together and have Santa and all of that, and really build relationships and build a family. And that's what we're all about. Like, you'll never see us yelling at legislators.
So if people want to get involved, you want them to go to your Facebook for social, and then kind of seeing the events that you have and get involved that way?
Yep. Yeah, that's probably the best way to get involved with us is, Facebook, sign up on our website, mnrights.org, to be on our mailing list. We don't send out a lot of stuff. We're, because we kind of grew, we're really little, and we don't necessarily, we're not seeking money. None of us get paid. We are all volunteers, like you said, kind of we're the mama bears. All of us work in some capacity. I would say most of us have children with some type of special needs. You will almost always see me as the face of the organization, simply because...
You're a rock star?
Well, no.
Duh. You're just
Thank
natural.
you,
No, you're natural. It's awesome.
But, our board member, Angie, has a child with severe special needs, and people with special needs are the unseen of the community.
That's what I wanted to actually ask.
In their homes.
My sister-in-law, even though she's not on talking terms right now with us, but 2 of her children are special needs, and I've been heavily involved. I actually PCA'd for a while for my nephew. I understand that there's this entire community that kind of is just like pushed down, forgot about. So can you kind of tell me what is that like, having a child that is special needs, and what challenges have you found in the public school system? Can you kind of touch on that?
So my son is just a fever syndrome. So his is really, I wouldn't even consider him special needs. He can function completely normal. So every 3 weeks for 3 days, he gets a fever. And there are fever syndromes with names, but none of those qualify for him. It's been interesting during COVID. His whole life, we just kind of were like, oh, you're a daycare kid. You get sick a lot. You get a fever. It wasn't until COVID that we realized there was a problem, because we were isolating and following the rules. And for most of it, I'll say, for the beginning. And we realized that nobody else, he's getting fevers and nobody else is getting them. And then we started tracking them. And then we went as far as conventional medicine would take us. And they were like, we don't have answers. But it was really interesting because when he wears a mask, it makes the fever rise. So for us, we're like, no, like I'm not putting him in a mask. So we homeschooled kindergarten because I was not going to mask him because it really wasn't safe for him because that fever would go significantly higher than it was. So we did end up homeschooling. This year was great. We had some problems with one of the illnesses that was possible, they needed to rule out, is seen in the eye. And they wanted to see him with a fever. Well, no ophthalmologist would see him with a fever because it could have been COVID.
Right.
So you're like, well, how do you rule this out? So there was a lot of really interesting stuff like that. But, actually one of our board members is a medical refugee from California.
Really?
Yep. So she went through the California process and they got booted out. Because what people don't realize is kind of this is a triggering word for a Republican, kind of the equity around exemptions, because what people don't realize is medical exemptions are expensive. You have to be able to find the right doctors. You have to be able to go to doctors.
And that's put on you.
That's
right?
put on me.
Right.
Yep. So actually a lot of people who use exemptions, so Minnesota has, we have a conscientious objection. So we have medical or conscientious. A lot of people use the conscientious, like me, when you're going through this exploratory process of trying to figure out what's going on. And it's free. You just go to your bank and you get it notarized. You don't have to go to a doctor. So a lot of people with legit medical reasons will just get a conscientious because it's free, cheap, and easy. So I think people don't realize that with medical exemptions. And what happened in California, what we saw happen was they politicized it, right? And so the government would start investigating, California started investigating doctors who gave too many medical exemptions.
Wow.
And so when you go in front of the medical board, you need legal counsel. And so doctors were just like, not worth the risk.
So they stopped giving them.
Correct. So you can actually test it out yourself. You can call a doctor in the state of California, call a pediatrician and say, hey, I have a child, I'm moving to California. I need an exemption for school. I have a child who, had an anaphylactic reaction to this vaccine. Will you give me an exemption? And see what they say. There was a group that did it. They called almost every pediatrician that they could get a hold of in California, and they could not get exemptions. So, and we, you see what happened to Dr. Jensen, right?
I think
You become a
5 or
target.
6 times his license was
Investigated.
investigated.
I think he was on his 5th one. So like to that point though, right? When you look at Minnesota and this potential of this movement, there is 100% these large medical organizations, right? Like in the healthcare industry that are saying, we should get rid of non-medical exemptions, right? So
Right.
in Minnesota, you have, is it the MMA? Minnesota Medical Association or something like that?
Yep.
And then you have, what is it, the pediatrician, American Academy of Pediatrics. Their stance publicly is we should get rid of non-medical exemptions. Do you have an opinion on, and this isn't your organization, just you as a person, like why is there this push to get rid of non-medical from these organizations?
I think it's got to come down to money.
Sure.
It's really got to come down to money, because we know that it's not necessary for public health, right? I mean, if we got rid of smallpox and we got rid of polio through other measures. So a lot of people think, hey, it was vaccinations that saved us from those things. They played a role. They're a tool. And when they're used, they can work. But we're just saying they're not without risk and that people should have that risk assessment. But we know that quarantines work, right? Like when we have a measles outbreak in Minnesota, quarantines is the first thing that you do. The guy who actually saw the last case of smallpox, his name was on the team. I think his name is Larry Brilliant. I believe he actually gives a TED Talk, and he talks about how vaccines can't do it.
Sure.
And how they did it through quarantine and isolating it. And he talks about how the birth rates happen so fast that you can't vaccinate as fast as people are born in some of these countries. So I think we really need to just recognize that there's more than one way to achieve public health, and that if we all work together, that we can do that, right? So, for example, my kids, they did get chicken pox, through shingles, and we can easily control that. Don't put your children in school, and practice. Just have safe practices when you're ill. And so, what we're proposing isn't that radical. It's just what we've done since the dawn of time. So it's got to be money that's really making this shift.
Absolutely.
There's no other reason.
Yeah, because like the narrative that I read about, that I hear about, and as you said, these organizations are 100% becoming political because they start to then include things like, again, and I'm not even trying to like start a whole conversation on this, but these organizations include things like gender ideology as part of the public health, and then like teaching gender ideology, not teaching like medical ways to like protect yourself. We're talking about just like teaching the ideology that is a public health issue, and then talking about the environment is a public health issue. So that's why, to me, like, those are my red flags. Like, wait. Like, we're talking about
So, AK, are you saying
diseases and stuff.
the environment is not the number one issue in concern to African Americans?
I don't think the number one medical or the number one health concern of African Americans, which I actually testified on in a committee talking about changing basically the designation of particulate matter in regards to damage to our ozone layer, and they literally gave this whole talk about the unintended health consequences of not lowering the standard, and then also including carbon dioxide in this equation. And I was just like, what are you guys talking about?
Do you think crime would be up there?
I mean, maybe, but
I don't know. But
I tend to agree with you that I think a lot of it does have to go with money. But I think the other thing is that tribalism is so strong in our society that you have to pick a side. And if you are part of an organization that has chosen that the side is whatever the experts, I'm going to put this in air quotes, say, everyone else has to follow that. And so this is what ends up becoming the problem, the issue, is that your organization, people like you're like, hey, I'm not saying I'm not going to listen to an expert. I'm just saying I should have the freedom to choose what I do for myself and my family. And that is a fundamental human right that I should have the freedom to choose.
And regardless of political side.
Right, regardless of political side. I should just have the freedom to choose. If I choose to get all my kids vaxxed and I'm on my 10th booster bivalent shot, that's your choice. I know there's going to be people that make fun of you, but that's society. People make fun of people. But if that's what you choose to do, cool. But don't force people to have to make these medical decisions and then tell them, if you don't do it, you're stupid. So that's basically what your organization, you're just like, we want to keep people informed. We want people to have, to know that there's a way that you can stand up against the machine, and that you have a family, a brotherhood, a sisterhood of other parents that are going through it just like you are. And that's what your organization is about,
Right, have a choice, and it's not about political sides.
No, it's really about what's doing best for that individual, that individuals deserve individual care.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah. So we could talk for hours.
We didn't even cover parental rights.
I know,
we only covered the health side.
So I'm going to ask you right here on the spot, will you come back so we can have like a part 2 where we talk about parental rights?
Sure.
Because I think that again is another aspect that is going to be hitting Minnesota,
right?
and especially with the change in makeup. There are some folks that are already lining up to say, hey, we got to do all these different things. But it's just you're awesome to talk to.
Yeah, thank you.
You're so knowledgeable, and I'm glad that you're an advocate for so many other people in your organization. Because you just got that gift. You fell into something that you never knew you would do, and here you are just rocking it out. And I appreciate you being on. And again, we're going to have our links up in the podcast. For those listening to the audio version, we'll have it linked in the description of where you can go so you can connect with this organization, sign up for their newsletter, and that way you can stay connected with what's going on in Minnesota, what parents should be aware of, and hopefully you make better informed decisions for you and your family, and stay up to date on what others are doing to fight back against the machine. So thank you again so much for being on.
Thank you for having
Melissa.
me.
Yeah,
fun.
Awesome. And I hope you have a happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, you
too. Thanksgiving Turkey Day for those listening to the audio podcast. Thanksgiving's already happened. So happy, I guess, belated Thanksgiving. Those of you watching here right now, we hope that you have an amazing Turkey Day. What kind of plans you got, Jai?
I will be working. So I'll be out there and making sure everybody else has a good thing.
So, side question. So if someone swung by the Bloomington PD and dropped off some turkey legs for you, would you get it?
You know what? We have a good community. A lot of people do.
Oh yeah, they do
support us.
That's cool.
And I'll be taking care of my partners, Ian and Lenny.
Okay. And I listen. That's an important thing to understand. Is that honestly, first responders, like people still got to work. You gotta go and answer calls. There's firefighters got to fight fires, right? Like that's so. Keep all of our first responders in mind.
It's all good, man. We're happy to do it.
I'm gonna have a bunch of family over at the crib. It should be pretty good. My family.
What's your favorite thing to eat on Thanksgiving?
So I actually had this argument with my wife. We've been married 18 years. Shout out to Schmoopy, but she told me that no one in the family was making party potatoes. Are you a party potato fan?
I don't even know what party potatoes are.
Yeah.
Melissa, do you know what?
No.
So party potatoes,
a North Dakota thing.
Party potatoes are basically hash browns with cheese in it, and some people put ham or bacon in it, and then you put like a cream cheese sour cream in it. It's amazing. But
all right, next time.
My wife's family makes it all the time, but she said that they weren't making it, and I said I've never been to a Cole function that did not have party potatoes, and I think that's garbage. So shout out to everyone. Have a happy, safe Thanksgiving. My name's AK Kamara.
I'm Jai Hansen,
and you've been watching and listening to Black and Blue Podcast. The Window Store is your locally owned and operated go-to source for high-quality updates at affordable prices. They specialize in windows, kitchen refacing, roofing, and entry doors. After 20-plus years of going above and beyond for homeowners in Minnesota and in Wisconsin, they are proud to be one of the top home improvement companies in the country. With over 900-plus reviews on Google and an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau, you can count on them to provide you with the best possible experience. Now, they're a company that you can depend on for your current and future projects, all backed by their done right guarantee. They'll provide you with straightforward, honest pricing and ensure that you are getting the best products for your needs installed by trained, licensed, and certified professionals. You can visit them online at www.windowstoreinc.com and let them guide you through every step of the process from start to finish. The Window Store is your locally owned and operated